My name is Danielle, and this happened in late October of last year. I was a sophomore in college, and my two closest friends, Mia and Jordan, were obsessed with doing something aesthetic every weekend in the fall. Pumpkin patches, corn mazes, cider mills. If it looked good on Instagram, they wanted to go. That Saturday, we picked a small family-owned orchard about 30 minutes outside the city. It wasn't a touristy spot like the big farms. This one barely had a sign on the road, just a faded wooden board that said, Clemson Orchard in peeling white paint. We honestly thought it was abandoned until we pulled into a gravel lot with two other cars. It was almost 5 in the afternoon. The sun was already dropping behind the trees, throwing these long shadows across the field. The air had that cold, crisp bite that happens right before November hits. We walked toward the entrance stand. An older man in a thick flannel jacket looked up from a notebook when he heard us. "Just letting you know," he said. "We close early today. You've got maybe 40 minutes before we shut the gates." We didn't mind. We weren't there for a full tour, just a quick fall outing, some pictures, maybe a couple of apples to take home. So we thanked him and headed into the orchard. The moment we stepped between the rows, everything felt quieter than I expected. No other people talking, no music, no tractors, just wind moving through branches and the occasional rustle of leaves dropping around us. It felt peaceful, but also a little too empty. We started walking deeper in, taking pictures as we went. Mia kept setting her phone on timer mode so she could run back for group shots. We laughed, messed around, tried to line up with aesthetic fallen leaves. We were acting normal, not expecting anything strange. But around 10 minutes in, Jordan stopped walking. "Do you guys see that?" she asked, squinting down one of the distant rows. Mia and I looked where she was pointing. A few lanes over, between two tall apple trees, there was someone standing. Not walking, not picking, just standing still. We couldn't make out much because of the distance, but the figure looked tall. Maybe a man. He was angled slightly toward us, though we couldn't actually see his face through the branches. Mia shrugged it off. "Probably just an employee," she said, but the orchard had felt empty since we arrived, and something about the way the person stood, completely still, like they were waiting, made my stomach tighten a bit. We kept walking. Every once in a while I'd glance to that row and I'd catch glimpses of the figure through the trees, still there, still facing us, never moving closer, never moving away. A few minutes later, the wind picked up hard, branches shook. A bunch of apples thudded to the ground around us, making all three of us jump. Jordan laughed nervously. "Okay, that scared the crap out of me." She wasn't the only one. We didn't see the figure again for a while after that, and I honestly thought he'd left. But as we got deeper into the orchard, the atmosphere changed. The trees grew closer together, the paths narrowed, and the sun dipped lower until everything had this weird bluish tint. That's when we heard it, this faint sound coming from somewhere ahead of us. A voice. At first we thought it was someone talking on the phone, but then we realized it was yelling. Not angry yelling, more like someone trying to get attention. "Hello? Hey, anyone out there?" It echoed weirdly between the rows, bouncing off the trees. We froze. Mia whispered, "Is someone lost?" The voice yelled again, but this time it was clearer. It wasn't coming from the direction of the figure we'd seen earlier. It was coming from the opposite side of the orchard. We followed the sound cautiously, weaving through the rows until the trees opened up into a clearing where a teenage boy wearing a staff sweatshirt was waving both arms above his head. "Hey, you guys aren't supposed to be out this far," he shouted. We hurried over, and he looked genuinely relieved to see us. "Sorry," he said. "I've been trying to find the last visitors. We're closing early today." Mia asked why, and he hesitated before answering. "We've had someone trespassing out here for a few days in a row now, just scaring customers, walking around where he's not supposed to be." He shook his head. "My boss said if we spot him again, we need to call the sheriff." My chest tightened. Jordan quietly whispered, "We saw someone." The staff kid's expression changed immediately. "Where?" We pointed toward the rows behind us. He looked, but between the dim light and the maze of branches, everything looked the same, just trees and shadows. The kid motioned for us to follow him back toward the entrance. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he was expecting someone to be behind us. When we reached the gravel lot, the older man from the entrance was already locking up the small wooden stand. The kid jogged over and whispered something to him. The older man looked up sharply. "Girls," he said, "did you see someone out there with you?" His tone was calm but serious. "We, think so," I said carefully. "A man, tall, standing in the rows. He never moved." The older man nodded grimly. "That matches the description." He pulled out his phone. "We've already called the sheriff for today. Just stay here until they arrive, please." The uneasiness I'd been feeling all afternoon settled deep in my chest. We stood near our car while the sun fully disappeared behind the tree line. The orchard grew dark fast. Within a few minutes, headlights pulled into the lot, 2 sheriff's vehicles. Officers talked briefly with the owner before heading into the orchard with flashlights. We waited there awkwardly, the wind getting colder, the rows of trees behind us turning into a wall of black. After what felt like 20 minutes, one officer returned. He spoke quietly with the owner, then walked toward us. "Did any of you get close enough to speak to the man you saw?" he asked. We shook our heads. "Did he approach you? Follow you?" "No," I said. "He just watched." The officer nodded, like that detail wasn't new to him. "This orchard's had a guy wandering around after hours. We've been trying to figure out what he's doing here. He doesn't talk to anyone, just stands between the trees." Jordan shuddered. "But he wasn't supposed to be here today," the officer said. "The staff did a sweep earlier. No one turned up." He paused. "Whoever you saw left before we arrived." The orchard was completely silent. The officer finally told us it was okay to head home, but to call them if we remembered anything else. We got into the car quickly, locking the doors the moment we were inside. As we pulled out of the lot, the headlights passed over the entrance to the orchard, nothing but darkness and rows of trees disappearing into the night. None of us spoke during the drive back. It wasn't until we were halfway to the city that Jordan finally whispered, barely audible. He never moved, but he always stayed the same distance from us. I hadn't even realized it until she said it. No matter where we walked, no matter how many rows we passed, he had always stayed parallel to us, always the same distance away, like he was pacing us, watching from between the trees. And the worst part, he had to move quietly, completely silently, to follow us without us ever hearing a single step. To this day, they never caught him. And I still think about that orchard every fall, wondering where he goes when the season ends, and if he ever actually left the trees at all. My name is Mark, and every year since I was a kid, my family has gone camping at the same state forest the first weekend of October. It became one of those traditions that nobody questioned. We just packed the car, drove 2 hours north, and spent 3 days surrounded by orange leaves, cold air, and the sound of the river running past our campsite. As I got older, the trips changed. My older sister stopped coming, my mom preferred staying at home, and eventually it was just me and my dad going together. It became our thing, one of the few traditions that survived when life started getting complicated. Last year was supposed to be the same as always, quiet, simple, just the 2 of us. But I noticed right away that this October felt different. The forest was nearly empty when we pulled in. Usually there were at least a few other families setting up, kids running around, couples hiking. But that day, 3 cars total. The temperature had dropped almost overnight, and the ranger at the gate even warned us, "Be careful up in the north section. Nights are colder than usual." And we've had some weird activity reported near the ridge. My dad laughed it off. He always did. But the ranger's tone stuck with me. We set up our tent at our usual spot, a wide, flat area near the river bend, surrounded by tall pines. Everything felt normal at first. We cooked over the fire, talked about the week, listened to the wind. But sometime near dusk, as the sky was turning pink behind the ridge, I heard footsteps on the slope above us. Not animals, not wind, actual footsteps, slow, careful, breaking leaves one by one. I looked up, expecting to see a deer or maybe another camper. But halfway up the hill, barely visible through the trees, was a small wooden cabin I swear had never been there before. It looked old, weathered, like it had been sitting there for decades. But I had hiked this exact area yearly since I was 10. I would have noticed a whole cabin. "Did you know about that place?" I asked my dad. He squinted up through the trees. "That's new." But something about the way he said it didn't sound convinced. We watched for a minute. There was no smoke, no light, no movement, and the footsteps had stopped the moment we looked up. My dad brushed it off quickly. Probably hunters. But the campground didn't allow hunting anywhere near this section. That night, after we settled into our tent, the temperature dropped hard. The forest went silent, except for the river. I was half asleep when I heard it again, those slow, deliberate steps on the hill. Crunch, pause, crunch, getting closer. I nudged my dad. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a few seconds, then zipped the tent slightly open to look outside. Our fire was mostly out except for a few glowing embers, so the trees above us were just silhouettes. "I don't see anything," he whispered. "Probably an animal." But his voice was too low, too tense. The steps moved again, circling a little to the right of the cabin. Then they stopped completely, like whoever or whatever was making them realized we were listening. We didn't sleep well that night. The next morning was bright and cold. You could see your breath even after the sun came up. My dad suggested we hike up the ridge to check out the cabin in daylight. I wasn't excited about the idea, but I didn't want to look scared. The trail up the hill was covered with leaves, fresh ones, meaning the cabin hadn't been used recently. Nobody had been walking up and down that hill often. When we reached the cabin, it looked even older up close. The wood was gray and splintering. The windows were dirty, the roof sagged slightly, and the door was cracked open about an inch. My dad pushed it gently with one finger. It creaked inward. Inside was nothing. No bed, no equipment, no stove. Just an old lantern sitting on the floor. And here's the thing that made both of us freeze. The lantern was still warm. Not hot, not lit, just warm enough that someone had touched it recently. My dad whispered, "Someone's been here." "And last night," I said quietly, "someone was walking around." We backed out slowly and closed the cabin door. My dad insisted it was probably a hunter ignoring the rules, but he was gripping his backpack strap hard enough that his knuckles were white. We hiked back down to camp, trying to shake it off. But the second night was worse. We'd barely finished dinner when the wind shifted and carried this low humming sound through the trees. It wasn't recognizable as a tune, just a soft, steady hum coming from the hill above us, from the direction of the cabin. My dad called out, "Hello? You need help?" The humming stopped instantly. Then the footsteps started again, only this time they were faster, still controlled, but no longer trying to stay hidden. Crunch, 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 moving around the cabin, circling, pausing, starting again. I whispered, "We're not staying here another night." My dad didn't argue. We kept the fire burning bigger than usual, and the footsteps moved on and off for hours, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but never fully gone. It felt like whoever was up there didn't want to come down, but didn't want to leave either. We barely slept, and at sunrise, my dad decided to check in with the ranger before packing up. I stayed behind to start breaking down the tent. It wasn't long before the footsteps started again, slow, deliberate, right where the trees began at the base of the hill. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like I was being watched. When my dad came back, he looked rattled in a way I'd never seen. "We're leaving," he said, "now." He didn't explain until we were already halfway down the highway. When he told the ranger about the cabin, the ranger got quiet and said, "There shouldn't be any structures up on that ridge. The only cabin up there was torn down years ago after a hunter reported that someone kept watching him from the trees all night. My dad told him the cabin was definitely still there." The ranger answered, "No, sir. A storm took it out in 2018. It doesn't exist anymore." My dad argued, described the cabin in detail, including the lantern. The ranger shook his head and said, "Whatever you saw up there, it wasn't a cabin." I felt cold all over. I still don't know what we saw that weekend, or who was walking around that ridge at night, or why the lantern was warm. But a week after we left, I checked online out of curiosity, and there weren't any cabins listed in that part of the forest. Not old ones, not hidden ones, not abandoned ones. And ever since that trip, whenever I think about those footsteps circling us all night, I get the same sinking feeling. If the cabin wasn't real, then what was watching us from inside it? My name is Ethan, and this happened when I was 16, a few Halloweens ago. I was walking around my neighborhood with my two younger siblings, my sister Lily, who was 10, and my brother Max, who was 8. We had a bag each, small candy buckets, and a strict rule from my parents: stay on the main street and be back before 9. It was late October. The leaves had all fallen off most trees, leaving orange and brown piles in every driveway. The streetlights were just flickering on as we started our rounds. Most houses were decorated with carved pumpkins and fake cobwebs. Kids ran around with superhero masks, witches' hats, or ghost sheets over their heads. We went house by house, trying to stay together. Most of the neighbors greeted us with smiles or jokes about the weather. Some gave extra candy. Some barely acknowledged us. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then we got to the very end of our street. There was this old house that everyone called the abandoned house. You could tell it had been empty for years. The paint was peeling, the roof sagging, and the windows were dusty and cracked. Usually, we never even approached it. It was dark, quiet, and kind of unnerving even in daylight. But this year, the porch light was on. I stopped. "Guys, that's weird," I whispered. Lily's eyes were wide. "Should we?" Max shrugged nervously. "Maybe someone's living there?" I didn't answer right away. My siblings were nervous, but I didn't want to seem scared. I figured maybe an old neighbor had moved back in or was taking care of something. So I walked up the cracked steps, keeping my voice calm. Before I could even knock, the door opened. I froze. An older woman stood there. Her face was shadowed by the dim light, and she didn't say anything at first. She was wearing a simple dark coat, nothing flashy, nothing Halloween-themed. She just stared at me for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Finally, she held out a single piece of candy. "You're the first one to come back in a long time," she said, her voice soft but steady. I swallowed hard and took it, murmuring a thank you. I glanced behind me at my siblings. Lily was clutching my arm. Max was frozen on the sidewalk. Neither of them said a word. I looked back at the woman, and that's when I realized something strange. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't frowning either. Her expression was blank, almost like she didn't recognize us, but she somehow knew why we were there. We thanked her again and hurried down the steps. The instant we were on the street, the door shut quietly behind her. "Let's go," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice normal, even though my heart was racing. We didn't stop until we reached the next house on the street. My siblings didn't say a word the entire way. They just kept glancing back toward that old house where the porch light still glowed softly. When we got home, my mom noticed we were unusually quiet. I pulled out the candy and her eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" she asked. I told her the story, hesitating at first, and then she went pale. Really pale. "That house burned down years ago," she said quietly. "It wasn't rebuilt. No one lives there. Nobody ever gives out candy there." I froze. The piece of candy in my hand felt heavier than it should. My siblings didn't say a word. We all just stared at each other. I couldn't stop thinking about it that night. How could someone have been standing on that porch, handing out candy, if the house didn't exist? And the way she said, "You're the first one to come back in a long time." What did that even mean? Curiosity got the better of me the next day. I wanted to see if maybe my mom was wrong, if the house had somehow been rebuilt, or if someone had moved in quietly. So I walked back to the end of the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the porch. Nothing. The lot was completely empty, just grass, weeds, and the old burned remains of the foundation. No steps, no door, no porch, not even the faintest trace of the woman I had seen the night before. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the shadows, my imagination, maybe even someone pulling a prank. But the candy was still in my pocket. A real, solid piece of candy from somewhere. I showed it to my mom. She just shook her head. "I don't know what you saw, Ethan, but you didn't see anyone there." I never went back to that street on Halloween after that. My siblings didn't want to either. Every year since, we've stayed closer to the main neighborhood and avoided the far end of the street. But every late October, when the leaves are falling and the streetlights flicker on, I can't help thinking about that porch, that candy, and the woman's blank expression. I'll never forget the way she looked at me and said, "You're the first one to come back in a long time." And the thing that chills me the most, I know I wasn't supposed to be there. And maybe, just maybe. She's still waiting.